2020. It's an incredibly confusing time for all of us. In this time of uncertainty, loneliness, and lockdown, we're all seeking inspiration in our lives. 2020 is also the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. So, who better to inspire us today than a woman who was herself a suffragist, one who exemplifies strength and resilience, and who is the very embodiment of determination and perseverance. That person is Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was born Araminta Minty Ross in eastern Maryland. She was born into slavery as one of 9 children, and her exact birth date is unknown, but it is believed she was born around 1820. In 1833, Tubman was almost killed when she was hit in the head with an iron weight, and suffered a skull fracture when she tried to block the path of an overseer who was aiming to stop a runaway slave. Because of this injury, she suffered from epilepsy and powerful seizures the rest of her life, which gave her visions which she called messages from God. These visions became Tubman's signature call to action later in her life, to escape from slavery on her own, and then to come back to try to save as many of her other relatives and friends as possible. In 1844, Harriet married a free man named John Tubman, but she was still legally owned by her master, Edward Brodess. In 1849, 2 important events changed her life. First, 3 of her sisters were sold off to the Deep South. Secondly, Edward Brodess died, and it was certain she would be sold. She took the opportunity to escape on September 17, 1849, with 2 of her brothers. Her brothers eventually turned back, and she proceeded on her own on a path to freedom known as the Underground Railroad. Recalling when she reached the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania, Harriet said these words to her biographer: "When I found that I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven." Now that she was free, Harriet decided to formally change her name to honor her mother and husband, but also to evade the notice of those coming after her. Over about a decade and in about 13 separate trips, Tubman led approximately 70 people to freedom and provided instructions to 50 to 60 others to help them escape. Harriet became known as Moses because she led her people to their promised land, and she was known for using a few African American spirituals to call out to those waiting for her. In 1896, she spoke at a women's suffrage convention saying, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." Among the people she saved were all 4 of her brothers and her elderly parents. Tubman even took charge in the Civil War, for which she was a soldier, nurse, and spy for the Union Army. She became the first American woman ever to lead an armed raid into enemy territory. In early June 1863, she became the first woman to command an armed military raid, liberating over 700 slaves. After the Civil War, she returned home and joined the women's suffrage movement, fighting for a woman's right to vote, and giving speeches in New York, Boston, and D.C. in the late 1890s. Harriet Tubman died in 1913, 7 years before the 19th Amendment was finally passed, but her dreams and her legacy live on. A movie called Harriet was released just this past year, a fictional account on Tubman's life up to the Civil War, that I found to be incredibly inspiring, showing the lengths Tubman was willing to go to fight not only for her own freedom, but for that of all her people. In her biography in 1886, Tubman herself says, "I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of 2 things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man should take me alive. I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted. And in recent years, there has been a push to put Tubman's face on the $20 bill. The Obama administration initiative meant for the new bills to be ready in 2020 to mark the bicentennial of Tubman's birth and the centennial of the 19th Amendment. When this happens, it will be a significant milestone in our history and a fitting honor for a woman of strength and determination. And those of us seeking inspiration today can find no better model than Harriet Tubman, a strong woman who valued God and family, who refused to give up on her dream of freedom even with the enormous obstacles in front of her, who persevered and found a way even when all seemed lost.